You've probably seen this scene, and this one. Maybe even this.
Brown foots, brown feet.
But what about
Blowers
these?
and brown foots, owl feet.
These scenes are from the 1978 animated film that first introduced a teenage Peter Jackson to the world of Tolkien. But this wasn't even the first attempt to bring Middle-earth to the screen. Welcome back to Gollum Flicker. Years before Bakshi's animation, other versions almost happened. In the late 1960s, the Beatles were at the height of their fame and wanted to make a musical adaptation of the books. They knocked on Stanley Kubrick's door, hoping he'd direct. Kubrick said the whole thing was unfilmable. But what really killed the project was Tolkien himself. The author reportedly considered the Beatles' music little more than noise pollution, and the idea of his life's work becoming some kind of psychedelic rock opera was, to put it mildly, offensive to him. In this video, we're diving into Ralph Bakshi's 1978 Lord of the Rings, a strange, ambitious, and ultimately unfinished adaptation that used experimental animation techniques, nearly destroyed its director, and stops right in the middle of the story with no resolution. The production was chaos from start to finish. Led Zeppelin agreed to do the soundtrack, then their record label killed the deal. Mick Jagger showed up at the studio wanting to voice Frodo and caused a near riot among the staff. A young Tim Burton worked on the animation in his very first job, and the director was so terrified of horses that he filmed the cavalry scenes from inside a trailer. Have you ever watched this adaptation? If so, what do you think of it? Let us know in the comments. So let's rewind and tell the full story of those early attempts. In 1967 or 1968, accounts vary, the Beatles were looking for their next film project. They had a 3-picture deal with United Artists, and after A Hard Day's Night and Help, they wanted something more ambitious. Their producer, Dennis O'Dell, suggested The Lord of the Rings. He sent copies of the books to the band while they were on retreat in India with the Maharishi. By most accounts, they got excited. The casting they came up with was unconventional. Paul McCartney would play Frodo, Ringo Starr would be Sam. But instead of having all 4 Beatles play hobbits, George Harrison wanted to play Gandalf. And John Lennon? According to O'Dell, Lennon kept changing his mind. At various points he wanted Gandalf, then Frodo, and finally settled on Gollum. They even had ideas for the supporting cast. The singer Donovan was set to play Merry. The model Twiggy was considered for Galadriel. For the director, Lennon had one name in mind: Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick had just finished 2001, A Space Odyssey. Lennon was a huge fan of his work and thought he was the only filmmaker who could pull off something this ambitious. O'Dell arranged a meeting. Kubrick read the books. He liked them, but his answer was no. He considered the material unfilmable with the technology available at the time. After Kubrick passed, they approached other directors, but then came the final blow. J.R.R. Tolkien himself rejected the project. The author had never been comfortable with how his books became associated with 1960s counterculture. The hippies, the psychedelia, the Frodo lives buttons. The idea of the Beatles turning his epic into a musical, with original rock songs replacing his carefully crafted poetry, was too much. According to various accounts, Tolkien considered their music noise pollution. A psychedelic rock opera adaptation of his life's work was simply unacceptable. The project died. The Beatles moved on to Yellow Submarine. Kubrick made A Clockwork Orange, and Tolkien sold the film rights to United Artists anyway. In 1970, they hired director John Boorman to write a script with Roscoe Pallenberg. What they came up with was something else. Boorman tried to cram the entire trilogy into a single 3-hour film. The script ran 170 pages and took some creative liberties that would make any Tolkien purist's head spin. We're talking scenes that were never in the books, including some that were, let's say, surprisingly intimate between Frodo and Galadriel. The studio looked at the budget, looked at the script, and said no. Boorman moved on. Years later, he recycled some of those ideas into Zardoz and Excalibur, and the rights kept waiting for someone brave or crazy enough to try again. Enter Ralph Bakshi. Bakshi wasn't your typical Hollywood animator. He grew up in Brooklyn, started his career at Terrytoons working on Mighty Mouse, and in 1972 made history with Fritz the Cat, the first animated film to receive an X rating. He was known for gritty, urban, adult animation. Not exactly the obvious choice for Tolkien. But Bakshi had been obsessed with The Lord of the Rings since 1956, when he first read the books as a teenager. He spent nearly 2 decades trying to get the rights. In 1976, producer Saul Zaentz finally made it happen. Zaentz had just won an Oscar for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and he believed in Bakshi's vision. The plan was to make 3 films, later negotiated down to 2 with a budget of $8 million for the first part. Bakshi's approach was unusual. He didn't want to make a cartoon. His words? "I wanted real illustration, not cartoons." To achieve this, he turned to a technique called rotoscoping.
Rotoscope is where you shoot live action and you produce photographs from the live action frame by frame.
It had been around since the silent film era, but Bakshi pushed it further than anyone had before. He also used something called solarization for the battle scenes, a photographic process that inverts tones and creates an eerie, almost otherworldly look. The result was unlike anything audiences had seen. Part animation, part live action, part fever dream.
I decided to shoot the whole movie. I said, my God, this is the only way to do it. Once I decided that, I knew I could do the movie.
Bakshi assembled a massive team, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people, working across 4 floors of a building at Hollywood and Vine. Among them was a young film student named Tim Burton, fresh out of Cal Arts. It was his very first job in the industry. Exactly what he did depends on who you ask. Bakshi said he painted cells. A colleague named Mike Plug remembers him as a rotoscope animator working on horse animations. And other sources say he simply cleaned dust off the cells. Plug, who sat across from Burton, later said the young artist drove me nuts because the horses' hooves never matched the backgrounds. For the live-action footage, the production travelled to Spain, filming at locations including Castillo de Belmonte for the Battle of Helm's Deep. And here's where Bakshi's personal limitations came into play. The director was terrified of horses. For any scene involving cavalry or mounted riders, Bakshi refused to go near the set. Instead, he directed those sequences from inside a trailer, watching through monitors while his crew handled everything outside. The cast performing for the rotoscope cameras included some interesting names. Billy Barty, a well-known character actor who stood 3 feet 9 inches tall, played both Bilbo and Sam. Sharon Baird performed as Frodo. Felix Silla, who would later play Cousin It on The Addams Family, was Gollum. The voice cast was recorded separately in London, featuring John Hurt as Aragorn and, here's a fun bit of trivia, Anthony Daniels as Legolas. Yes, C-3PO played an elf in Middle-earth. But the production was far from smooth. In Spain, the local film lab discovered that some of the footage contained modern elements in the background, like telephone wires, helicopters, even cars. Their solution? They tried to destroy the footage entirely, claiming that if word got out about such sloppy work, no Hollywood production would ever return to Spain. And then there's the story of the Union lunch break. Bakshi was filming the massive battle at Helm's Deep with 9 cameras rolling, thousands of extras in orc costumes, everything finally coming together. Right in the middle of the shot, a Union boss called for a lunch break. The extras started walking off toward the food tables. Bakshi kept the cameras running, and that footage ended up in the final film as the orcs retreating. Oh no, the Nazgul have tracked our location, and they're coming to fill the comments with shadow. Quick, subscribe to Golden Flicker and hit the like button to bring light to the channel. What other legendary films are hidden in your archives? Let us know before the Black Riders get here. Bakshi originally wanted Led Zeppelin to compose the music. The band was famously obsessed with Tolkien. Their songs are filled with references. Ramble On mentions Gollum and Mordor directly. The Battle of Evermore reads like a Tolkien poem. The band agreed, but was signed to Swan Song Records, and any music they created would belong to that label. Saul Zentz owned Fantasy Records. The lawyers got involved. The deal fell apart. Instead, composer Leonard Rosenman wrote an orchestral score. It earned a Golden Globe nomination, but one can only imagine what a Led Zeppelin soundtrack might have sounded like. And then there's the Mick Jagger incident. He wanted to voice Frodo and visited the studio. When Jagger walked through the building, the staff completely lost it. Screaming, fainting, people running down the staircases. Bakshi later described the sound as thunder, like horsemen. His own son locked himself in a bathroom until it was over. And after all that chaos, Jagger was too late. Christopher Guard had already been cast as Frodo. By the time Bakshi finished principal production, he had a rough cut of nearly 150 minutes. He asked the studio for 3 more months to edit it properly. They gave him 4 weeks. The final cut runs 132 minutes. And if you've seen the film, you've probably noticed the first half has a deliberate, almost meditative pace. The Shire feels lived in. The journey to Rivendell takes its time. But somewhere around the middle, things start to feel rushed and disjointed. Plot points blur together. Characters appear and disappear without explanation. The Battle of Helm's Deep arrives almost out of nowhere. With only 4 weeks to cut nearly 20 minutes and deliver a finished film, Bakshi had to make brutal choices. Scenes were trimmed or removed entirely. Transitions that needed finesse were cut abruptly. An extended sequence of Gandalf fighting the Balrog was replaced with a quick photo montage. Decades later, Bakshi's son Eddie found some of the deleted animation in the archives and restored pieces of it. But the theatrical cut still bears the scars of that impossible deadline. And yet, the editing wasn't the real betrayal. The film was always meant to be part 1 of a larger story. It covers the Fellowship of the Ring and roughly half of the Two Towers, ending at the Battle of Helm's Deep. The title was supposed to be The Lord of the Rings Part 1. 1 week before release, United Artists removed Part 1 from the title as they believed audiences wouldn't pay full price for half a movie. Audiences walked into theatres expecting a complete story. They walked out confused and angry. The film simply stops. The sequel was never made. Bakshi refused to return after what he called the worst experience of my life. He said the production nearly killed him. The studio behind the 1977 animated Hobbit, Rankin Bass, eventually made The Return of the King in 1980 as a television special. but it had a completely different animation style and skipped everything between where Bakshi's film ended and the final act of the story. The film was released on November 15, 1978, in just 31 theatres. Despite everything, it made money. $30.5 million domestic on an $8 million budget. Critics were divided. Roger Ebert called it a mixed blessing and flawed but inspired. Others were less kind. Some praised the ambition. Others criticised the unfinished story and inconsistent animation. Fans of the books were particularly hostile. The abrupt ending felt like a betrayal. On Rotten Tomatoes today, it holds a 48% approval rating. For most of the next 2 decades, the film was treated as an embarrassment. It was overshadowed by the Rankin/Bass productions and largely forgotten. And now we arrive at the golden flicker moment. In 1978, a 17-year-old kid in New Zealand watched Bakshi's Lord of the Rings in a cinema. It was his first encounter with Tolkien's world. That kid was Peter Jackson. He later said the film made him seek out the books. His first copy of The Lord of the Rings had Bakshi's artwork on the cover. He also became obsessed with the 1981 BBC radio adaptation, listening to it repeatedly for nearly 20 years. When Jackson finally made his own trilogy, the influence was undeniable. Watch the 2 versions side by side. The shot of Frodo hiding under a tree root while the Black Rider looms above? Almost identical. The moment at Bilbo's party when a hobbit shouts, "Proud feet?" Jackson acknowledged on the DVD commentary that it was a direct homage to Bakshi's film. Even Gollum's design owes a debt to Bakshi. The loincloth that Gollum wears? Not in Tolkien's text. Bakshi invented it. Jackson kept it. Now it's how everyone pictures the character. Peter Woodthorpe, who voiced Gollum in 1978, also played the character in the BBC radio version. His vocal performance, the hissing, the split personality, the tortured delivery clearly influenced what Andy Serkis later did with the role. Bakshi proved that Lord of the Rings could work on screen, even if his version was incomplete. Do you agree that this is the golden flicker moment? Let us know in the comments. For years, Bakshi resented Jackson, or at least resented the lack of acknowledgement. In interviews, he complained that Jackson initially claimed he'd never seen the 1978 film, only to later admit it was an inspiration. Bakshi called Jackson's trilogy special effects garbage made to sell toys, saying his own version had more heart. But time softened things. In 2015, Bakshi apologized for some of his harsher comments. There's one more detail worth mentioning. At some point, Bakshi received a message from Priscilla Tolkien, the author's daughter. She told him she loved the film. Bakshi said it meant everything to him. Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings is not a perfect film. It's unfinished, it's uneven. The animation shifts styles. The ending is abrupt. The pacing is rushed. But it's also ambitious, visually striking, and historically significant. It proved that Tolkien's world could be brought to screen. It introduced a generation to Middle-earth. It directly inspired the trilogy that would become one of the most successful film franchises in history. And it nearly broke the man who made it. Bakshi is still around, selling artwork and running an animation school in New Mexico. His legacy is complicated, but it's undeniable. If you've never seen the 1978 Lord of the Rings, it's worth a watch. Not as a replacement for Jackson's films, but as a fascinating artifact. A glimpse at what might have been. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to Golden Flicker for more deep dives into forgotten films and lost Hollywood history. Which film should we explore next? Let us know in the comments. See you in the next one.